Thank you for attending the presentation titled Toward Developing Primary School Learners' Reading Skills, an analysis of top-down, bottom-up, and interactive approaches. I am Dr. Nazarana Mather from the IIE's Varsity College Online Center, which is located in South Africa. To begin the presentation, I will do an introduction, which will be an overview of reading in middle school, followed by the research methodology, which is desktop study. I will then provide a review of literature, and finally provide the key findings, discussions, and conclusions. Literacy education internationally is still in crisis. Only a third of 10-year-olds globally are estimated to be able to read and understand a simple story. Out of 45 countries who participated in the International PEARLS testing between 2016 and 2021, the data reveals that 28 countries, or 62%, show that in 2021, more children were below minimum reading proficiency than in 2016, with the most noted differences visible in Azerbaijan, Latvia, Kazakhstan, and South Africa. In South Africa, children are performing poorly against their African counterparts in international tests and in tests conducted within the country. Thus, an obvious choice for research in attempting to discover causes for this dismal situation is to find out what is happening in terms of learning and teaching every day in the classrooms of our schools. A practical entry point for this is the teaching practices of our teachers, particularly those directly related to reading development of our school children. An argument put forward by Grave is that there is no single notion of reading. Grave rejects simple statements that attempt to define reading, because if one considers the different purposes for reading and the varying processes that are used by fluent readers, no single statement would be able to encapsulate the intricacy of reading. It is for this reason that the development of reading skills is complex. In this paper, literature about the progress from emphasis on bottom-up models of developing reading skills to emphasis on top-down and finally interactive models is investigated. This desk study sought to gain insight into approaches that can be used to effectively develop middle school learners' reading skills. Desk research or secondary research is a research method that involves using already existing data by conducting research through web searches, online platforms, industry reports, or even physical books. In this study, rigorous research has been conducted using online platforms such as SavvyNet and EBSCOhost to source credible, relevant, and current research related to the phenomenon that is being investigated. The study further provided an example of how the interactive approach to reading has been applied in a particular context. The research questions for this study were: what do the different approaches for developing learners' reading skills entail? How effective are these approaches in middle school classrooms? From the age of 10 to 11, learners are required to read increasingly complex and specialized texts in different school subjects. This means that they must master more specialized reading embedded in disciplinary uses of literacy. In South Africa, learners' reading literacy has been the topic of growing concern, as international reading surveys such as the PEARLS for several years, including 2021, showed a general decline in reading comprehension. It is imperative that we have a holistic understanding of different approaches to developing learners' reading skills and investigating how they work in different contexts. Early work in second language reading assumed a bottom-up view of reading. The bottom-up approach stipulated that the meaning of any text must be decoded by the reader and that learners are reading when they can sound out the words. Verbeek states that the term bottom-up is used because such models work from the smallest unit of print, the letters, and build up to words, sentences, paragraphs, and whole texts. The example on the slide demonstrates the first basal reading programs, and these were a set of readers which were designed according to supposed learners' interests and developmental capabilities. These readers had short sentences and controlled vocabulary by letter-sound correlation and frequency of use. Second are bottom-up approaches influenced by linguistic issues which focus on teaching regularly spelled words and word groups. Another example of bottom-up models is the look-say method. Here, words are memorized based on their overall shape briefly, a vocabulary of 50 to 100 words, and other words are gradually acquired through seeing them repeatedly in a story. Now, bottom-up theories of reading were recognized as inadequate and fell out of favor when it was realized that they did not consider that the reader brings their own experiences and predictions about text. Also, although the bottom-up approach provides a good account for decoding, there is more to reading than decoding. Whilst decoding is a necessary skill for reading, it is not sufficient. Learners who can decode might only be barking at print, which means they are able to read with fluency and correct pronunciation, but have no idea what they are reading. In other words, they are learning to read aloud, but they are unable to read to learn. The trend that followed the bottom-up decoding approach was the top-down approach, which regarded meaning as the center of the reading process. Top-down methods of reading focus on what the reader brings to the text and proceed from whole to part, thus do not see reading as involving the processing of each letter and word. The assumption that decoding precedes comprehension is considered inaccurate. Rather, reading is viewed as a cyclical process as opposed to being a linear process and involves the use of visual, perceptual, syntactic, and semantic processes which all play a fundamental role in comprehension. Grabe explains that according to this model, a reader generates expectations about the upcoming text, samples minimally from the text as needed, confirms expectancies, and generates new predictions. Initially, this model gained popularity and was widely accepted, but was later criticized because good readers do not necessarily guess what words will appear next. It does not adequately represent the process of fluent reading and does not account for how readers attach meaning to a text. Bottom-up and top-down approaches to teaching reading were found to be deficient for many reasons, but each had significant value in explaining views on how reading takes place. The interactive or balanced model of reading gained popularity as it considers the strengths from both the bottom-up and top-down model and avoids the deficiencies of each. An interactive model is an amalgamation of both bottom-up and top-down processes and recognizes that both should interact concurrently throughout the reading process. Perfetti, Landy, and Oakill's model of reading aims to understand how people acquire the skill of comprehending what they read. According to these authors, comprehension occurs as the reader builds a mental representation of a text message. This situation model is a representation about what the text is about. The comprehension processes that bring about this representation occur at multiple levels across units of language, word level, sentence level, and text level. Across these levels, processes of word identification, parsing, referential mapping, and a variety of inference processes all contribute, interacting with the reader's conceptual knowledge to produce a mental model of the text. The following suggestions of classroom implications and applications of the interactive approach are made. Firstly, learners can be assisted to develop their bottom-up skills by developing their vocabulary and grammatical skills. This means that the teacher must include instruction on cohesive devices of the language and their function across sentences and paragraphs, as well as pre-teaching vocabulary and background knowledge concurrently. Secondly, their top-down processing skills can be developed by building background knowledge, which will help the learners to predict which prior existing knowledge to access. Activating background knowledge using text mapping strategies and developing predictive skills gives the reader a purpose for reading. The Curriculum and Assessment Policy document is used in South African schools to inform teaching, learning, and content. According to the CAPS document for middle school learners, the reading process is promoted when developing learners' reading skills. However, learners will not be able to master the skills mentioned in this reading process if they are unable to decode the text with fluency and accuracy. Pronunciation is important because the way a person speaks conveys something about them. Learners with good pronunciation are more likely to be confident and understood, even though they make mistakes in other areas. On the other hand, learners who have perfect grammar but who have difficulty with pronunciation may not be understood because their pronunciation may distort the meaning of the message they are trying to convey, and they may be judged as incompetent or lacking in knowledge. In addition to focusing on learners' comprehension skills, when developing learners' reading skills, emphasis should also be placed on vocabulary development and language structures and conventions. Vocabulary and language activities must be selected from and placed within the context of the text that the learners have read. A list of grammatical structures and conventions, as well as vocabulary development that learners are required to identify, understand, and use are provided in the CAPS document. In this presentation, an exploration of the bottom-up, top-down, and interactive approaches to reading, as well as a brief discussion of the CAPS have been provided. Key points worth recapping, which are particularly relevant to the South African situation, include the following. Firstly, reading consists of both decoding and comprehension processes, which are vital for learners to make meaning of a text. Secondly, comprehension is the most important part of reading. Thirdly, comprehending a text involves being able to summarize key points, make inferences, critical thinking, and making links between prior knowledge and the text. Lastly, if teachers do not understand and place value on the complexities involved in teaching reading for meaning, and were not adequately trained at college or in subsequent workshops to teach reading for meaning, reading instruction in the classroom will be superficial, which may affect learner readiness for the higher grades. The following slides show the sources that were consulted to compile this presentation. I thank you for viewing my presentation.